All right, well, let's dive in. As you all know, you are here tonight for a discussion on laundry to landscape graywater. Tonight's program is brought to you through a collaboration with the City of Santa Rosa and Dailyx. Again, thank you for being here. So my name is Liz, and I am the Climate Resilience Program Manager at Dailyx. I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Connor, who is a program coordinator, and we are excited to talk about graywater. Really quickly, I want to introduce our organization. So for those of you who don't know, Dailyx is a small and mighty environmental education nonprofit that is based in Petaluma and working throughout Sonoma County to provide people with the knowledge, skills, and resources to be able to live a rich and full lifestyle while having a smaller environmental impact. Dailyx works to connect people and build community through our education programs, our action campaigns, and by influencing policies that help to address the climate crisis. Over the last 20 years, our impacts have been far and wide, and we are so grateful for the partnerships that we've made along the way and for all of you that continue to show up to our events and believe in the power of our daily actions. So again, thank you for being here this evening. As I just mentioned, tonight is a Zoom webinar. In order to interact with tonight's program, please use the Q&A box. We're going to be doing a presentation and then holding questions until the end. So again, please use the Q&A box for any questions that come up throughout tonight's program. If you want to interact with fellow participants or panelists, please go ahead and use the chat and make sure that your settings are set to everyone. Or if you just wish to speak to the panelists, make sure that they're set to panelists. So before we dive in, I do want to give a little bit of context. I'm sure you all are well aware that the drought is still here. I just want to emphasize how critical it is that everyone works to save water now and throughout the end of the year, because we all need to be doing our part to preserve and extend our water supply throughout this dry year. If you were to take a look at some of our storage levels in our water basins, on the next slide, you'll see some of the dramatic photos of our storage levels. If you were to look at Lake Mendocino in the top photo, Lake Mendocino supplies our upper river communities and Healdsburg North, and its storage capacity is only at about 59%. Lake Sonoma, which provides water to the majority of Sonoma County, is only at about 53% of its storage level. So you can tell that we already have quite a ways to go before we are back at safe storage levels. So in response to the regional water supply conditions and our historically low reservoir storage levels, the City of Santa Rosa, as well as many other cities in Sonoma County, have continued to require a 20% mandatory community-wide reduction in water use. In addition to the water use restrictions, water use restrictions are still in effect. Santa Rosa and many other cities are asking residents to make behavior changes that can help to eliminate water waste and conserve water. Again, we are all in this together, and it is critical that we are making every drop of water count. So before we talk about graywater, I just want to take a moment to highlight some of the mandates that the City of Santa Rosa has put in place in order to help folks conserve water. So first, it is prohibited to wash your hard surfaces with potable water. Second, pressure washing with potable water is also not allowed. It is going to be required that you repair indoor and outdoor water leaks. And if you need assistance identifying any leaks, please reach out or review your city's websites for resources on checking leaks, as well as how to gain a better understanding of how to read your water meter. I also want to mention that the City of Santa Rosa's website has great resources for leak detection, and the City of Santa Rosa also offers free dye tablets so that you can test your indoor appliances for leaks. It is also required that folks have a shutoff nozzle on all hoses. The city also offers free nozzles to support this requirement. And lastly, landscape irrigation can only be applied between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. For anybody who has seen this mandate, I do want to mention that technically only overhead irrigation is prohibited during the day. So you still can irrigate with drip or by hand watering during the daytime, but I do want you to know that it's likely that you're going to lose a good amount of water to evaporation, and watering in the later part of the evening is going to be more efficient no matter what. So I'm sure you know, the city has a long-standing commitment to water use efficiency. And if you take a look at Santa Rosa's water website, again, you can read more about their resources, their rebates, and their conservation incentives. And for tonight's program, I want to uplift the Laundry to Landscape Graywater rebate that Santa Rosa has. So if you are a Santa Rosa water customer, all of these water conservation rebates will apply to you. For laundry to landscape rebate, you can get up to $100 per qualifying laundry system. And it is essential that you qualify before you start a project. So please take a look at the City of Santa Rosa's website, because there are very specific requirements for qualifying, and you want to be sure you qualify before doing any of the work for any of these rebates. And again, just want to uplift the City of Santa Rosa's Water Smart website. It has an abundance of resources to help you through your water conservation journey. And with that, I think I'm ready to pass the mic over to Connor to lead us through an informative presentation.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you everyone for being here. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. Yes, we're here for laundry to landscape graywater reuse systems. We're going to walk you through a bunch of different concepts and considerations from what is graywater, what is this system, is your site right for it, what kind of plants do you want to be watering, what are some of the rules and regulations, and then kind of zooming in on the different components and what the installation process can look like and entail as far as costs and time. And we'll have plenty of time for questions for anything that we don't cover or that's unclear. Liz and I will do our best to answer those questions, and anything you stump us with, we'll do our best to follow up with you with an answer in the days following the program. Just a quick reminder, we are recording this, so if for any reason you aren't able to stick with us the whole night, we'll be sending the recording up to you along with a bunch of really helpful resources. I'll mention a bunch of things throughout the presentation that we'll send to you, some of like the parts lists and plumbing code. So don't fret about like jotting down notes for the really detail heavy stuff unless you want to, because we'll be sending that to you in a really awesome handout resource that we use called the Greywater Master Handout. So before we jump into the main content, sorry, we got the smart train going by. Just want to talk a little bit about watershed awareness and our context and why the graywater and other water conservation efforts are important. So I figure most of us are familiar with this dear planet. We call it planet Earth, but as Brock Dolman of Occidental Arts and Ecology has pointed out, this is kind of a misnomer. So it's true that our planet is the only one we know of with soil, like this whole world of life in the dirt. But the majority of the planet, the pale blue dot, as we sometimes call it, is covered in water. So planet water might actually be a more appropriate name if you think about it. And yet, only a tiny fraction of that water is available to us as fresh water. So if you look at this image, it might be easier to see at the bottom here. Let me get my little laser pointer going. We've got this big marble here representing all of the water on the planet. This smaller one over the Midwest is representing all of the liquid fresh water. So that is water excluding the like polar ice caps and glaciers. And then if you can see it on your screen, there's one very tiny little orb here over like Georgia, South Carolina area that is representing all of the water that can be found in freshwater lakes and rivers, which is water that's available to us. All of that is to say that less than 1% of water on this planet is available to us as freshwater. So while it's a renewable resource, the water cycle is always going. It is, in a sense, limited in its availability to us. So zooming in on Santa Rosa, in August of 2017, the city of Santa Rosa used 392 million gallons of water. And I'm going to throw some numbers at you. I'll try to keep it pretty high level. But that basically means that the average resident of Santa Rosa used 54.3 gallons of water each day that month. So where does all this water come from? The easy answer is the Russian River, right? But there's a lot of complexity, engineering, and energy involved in getting water from the Russian River to your tap. There's also a little bit of help occasionally from the Eel River by way of the Pillsbury Reservoir. This is a diagram from Sonoma Water. It's really worth looking at in detail sometime if you watch the recording of this presentation, just to understand what some of these complexities are, from holding tanks to water pumping stations. It's pretty fascinating. The kind of follow-up question is, where does water go after we use it in our taps? So water that goes down the drains of our showers, toilets, and sinks enters the wastewater collection system, which is over 500 miles of underground pipes, bringing this wastewater from homes, businesses, and industry in Santa Rosa, but also in Rohnert Park, Cotati, Sebastopol, and the South Park Sanitation District to the Laguna Treatment Plant, which you can see is here kind of off Llano Road by 116. So most of that is just being moved by gravity through those pipes to the plant where it'll be treated. Some places that's not an option because of elevation. So we have 18 wastewater lift pump stations that are using energy to pump that water uphill to get it to the treatment facility. So while it's true that this water is reused after it's treated, this plant works with like almost 7 billion gallons of water each year, which I know is a hard number to kind of visualize, but suffice it to say it's a lot of water. And in most years, about all of it, it's called tertiary treated water. Almost all of it gets used to irrigate things like sports fields. It's used in agriculture. There's a whole list of like appropriate uses that this water is deemed safe for. So we hear a lot about how we're running low on water. And I think most people generally think about this problem from the perspective as we don't have enough water, rather than are we using too much water, or are we maybe not using it efficiently? Is it maybe a design problem? So just a few more numbers. I try to keep it painless. Santa Rosa historically gets about 30 inches of rain a year. Not every year, right? In 2019, it's a big rain year. We had more like 42 inches. Roughly in a drought year, we can expect to get anywhere from like half to 3/4 of that amount. So if you bear with me for a minute, let's say we have a year that's on the really low end of a drought year. Let's say we get 15 inches of rain. Santa Rosa is like about 43 square miles in area, which is over 27,000 acres. 1 inch of rain that falling on 1 acre of land creates 27,000 gallons of rain. So for each inch of rain that falls on Santa Rosa, that's over 742 million gallons of water, if my math is right. 15 inches is over 11 billion gallons. So if you do the math really quickly, you know that even if every month of the year we were using as much water as Santa Rosa used in August of 2017, which was almost 400 million gallons, we're still getting more rain every year than we're using. So if we double that drought year to an average year, it's over 22 billion gallons of water. So I'm hoping you're starting to see that maybe we're just not designing the built landscape in our water system in such a way to use the resources available to us. Maybe we could be thinking differently about our relationship to water. We could be operating from a position of abundance rather than scarcity. So one way to do that is by slowing, spreading, sinking, and storing the flow of water across the landscape, which is a huge part of what we do at Daily Acts. And another way is what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is by reimagining how we interact with what we call wastewater. So we have gray is the new green. So the average family of 4 uses around 8,000 gallons of water each year washing their clothes alone. And we use clean, potable water or drinking water. We use it once to wash our clothes, and then we send it off to the treatment plant. The same is true with our showers, our sinks, and our toilets. If you stop to think about it, it seems kind of strange that we're using drinking water to flush our toilets, right? Let alone to wash our clothes. Does it have to be this way? Of course not. There's so many ways we could be better designing these systems, and maybe more relevant to us here tonight, many ways we can modify existing systems right here in our homes and in our landscapes to be saving water. So in California, there are different designations of what we call waste water. There's black water and there's gray water. We'll start with the latter since that's what we're here for tonight. So California defines gray water as the wastewater that comes from our washing machines, our showers, our tubs, and our bathroom sinks. What gray water isn't is water from our dishwashers, from our kitchen sinks, from toilets, or any water that has otherwise come into contact with contaminants like feces, grease, oils, things like that. In California, black water is not considered suitable for reuse, at least not without fancy like permitted treatment systems, kind of like what happens with our wastewater treatment systems. So tonight we're going to be focusing specifically on gray water that comes from the washing machine, and I'll explain why we're focusing on that in a few minutes. So why do we want to reuse gray water? The obvious ones, it's saving water, right? And it's saving drinking water. We're using water twice. So for that same reason, we're saving money because you don't have to pay for the water to irrigate your landscape if you're just using it a second time once you've already used that water to wash your clothing or your sheets, whatever. It helps combat drought and climate change. For a lot of reasons, we could have a whole webinar on that alone, but the easiest answer is that it's saving water and keeping soils and plants hydrated. It saves energy. 12% of all energy used in California is related to water. It's like what I was talking about with the treatment center and the pumps, right? We're using energy to pump water from underground aquifers. We're moving water from one location to another, treating it, heating it, cooling it. All these savings really add up to make an impact. Similarly, the less water that's going through those treatment systems and septic means less stress on them. You're going to have to be really intentional with soaps and products that you use in your washing machine if you have a laundry to landscape gray water system. And coincidentally, though probably not surprising, just as they're healthier for your plants, they're healthier for you. And last, not necessarily, but in many cases, using a laundry to landscape system allows you to grow food, which is a good win for a lot of reasons. So before we get into the details, I just want to kind of uplift this really pretty but simple schematic of what a laundry to landscape system looks like. And I just, invite you to consider, like, does this look simple? Does it look complicated? What are your reactions? Feel free to share in the chat if you like. And in the meantime, just a really quick shout out to Art Ludwig of Oasis Design, who created this system. He developed the first laundry detergent that biodegrades into plant food. He was one of the writers of the laundry gray water exemption for the plumbing code. Oasis has a really amazing gray water information central at oasisdesign.net/graywater. Liz, maybe you can grab that link and drop it in the chat for folks. We'll send it out in the follow-up email as well. You can also buy Art's books there. He has the most popular books on gray water and a lot of other water conservation strategies, which makes sense. He created this system. So I'm seeing in the chat, people are saying it looks simple, and I agree. There are considerations you'll have to take into account, but all in all, with an informational workshop like this or a hands-on workshop, I'm confident that virtually anybody can do this themselves. It's very DIY friendly. All right. So someone in our intros at the beginning of the program said they were interested in learning if this system was a good fit for them. And so these are some quick questions to determine whether these systems are a good fit for your home or not. So if your washing machine is on an external facing wall, or you have an accessible crawl space underneath your washing machine, or better yet, your washing machine is outside and not within a building, that's going to make it really easy for you to get the gray water from your washing machine to your landscape. Similarly, all washing machines have a pump built into them. That pump is capable of moving gray water about 100 feet on flat land. So if your garden is with, or your landscape is within 100 yards of your 100 feet, excuse me, of your washing machine, it could be a little bit further if it's downhill. It would have to be a little closer if we're going uphill. It'll be a good fit. And if you're looking to irrigate fruit trees, ornamental trees, both native and adaptive, or shrubs, these are all great situations for gray water. On the other hand, if you've got a slab foundation and your washer is on the bottom floor in the center of your house, it's going to be very difficult or unsightly for you to route that water outside. Similarly, if your washing machine is upstairs in the center of your house, unless you're willing to be putting holes through interior and exterior walls and having PVC pipe that would be visible, it would be pretty hard to make this work. If you've got a sodium-based water softener, the plants and soil of your landscape don't want that sodium. So you have the opportunity to switch to a potassium-based water softener if you're really set on getting a laundry to landscape system, but it's worth mentioning that they are considerably more expensive than a sodium-based softener. If you're hoping to irrigate a turf lawn, bad news, gray water is not a good way to do that. Lawns have really short roots, and the way that gray water has to enter the landscape, you can't run it through a sprinkler. It's just not going to work out. The lawn's not going to be successful. In my personal opinion, you're better off with those fruit trees and ornamentals and natives anyway. And then lastly, if your garden is uphill on a pretty significant slope, or if it's really far away from your washing machine, it's probably not going to work out. Okay. Going into a little more detail on the plants. So I mentioned trees. Trees are great. Basically, a rule of thumb is if you can plant things that have relatively large root systems that like being watered with more water at a time and less frequently. Can you think about when you're doing your laundry, it's not going to add up to your, drip irrigation cycle of half an hour, 3 times a week. It's going to be a lot of water at once, maybe only once a week. So fruit trees are great, especially new trees. I'll talk more about that later, but a lot of laundry to landscape systems you install at the same time that you're planting your plants. Shrubs and bushes, vines, perennials, larger annuals, and non-water sensitive food crops. Again, if you have something that needs to be watered every day a little bit, gray water is not the right option. And to be compliant with the code, your gray water is not allowed to come in contact with the edible parts of any fruit or vegetable. So easy way to remember it is tomatoes work, carrots do not, because carrots are underground. Lettuce, probably not. It's right at the soil surface. You get the idea. Some other things that don't work, I mentioned lawns, smaller potted plants, raised beds, anything that you're going to have to be going back up or where the gray water could spill out above the soil surface, not going to work out. I mentioned that new trees are better. One of the main reasons is if you've got, let's say you have like a native coast live oak that is 10 plus years old, it's never gotten irrigation. If you start giving that tree 20 to 100 gallons of water once a week, you could very well kill it. It's going to shock the roots. The plants are not going to appreciate that kind of treatment. And similarly, very low water use plants, if you've got like xeriscape going on or some particular like Sonoma County natives that have adapted to living where they don't really get water, gray water is going to do more harm than good. I mentioned we would share this code for you. Again, we're not going to go through every bullet. You don't need to write these all down. We'll send it to you. But just some key takeaways. Every system needs a 3-way brass valve that allows you to divert water to either the landscape or back to the sewer where it's already gone. So I know a lot of people have concerns about laundry products, and people really like to use bleach in their washing. If you do a load with bleach, you can always set your system to go to the sewer so that you're not killing your plants with bleach. Many of these code requirements have to do with the way gray water is discharged into the landscape, how and where it moves on the land, essentially because gray water is, they want you to minimize contact with it, and you don't want it to run off of your property onto anyone else's or into our waterways, at which point it can be considered a nuisance or even a contaminant. So another important note about this code is laundry to landscape systems do not require any kind of formal permit, which is one of the main ways they differ from like shower and tub and bathroom sink gray water systems, which we sometimes call shower to flowers or branch drain. If you are designing and operating your system in accordance with these guidelines, it's considered an implied permit, which I think, you know, removes a pretty big barrier for installation and keeps costs nice and low. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at what these systems look like up close. This is, in my mind, one half of a laundry to landscape system. So we've got our indoor components here. Here's that three-way brass valve I was just talking about. You can see the handle here. It would look to me like right now, water is being directed back into that sewer standpipe. Basically, there's a ball valve inside this housing. You turn it one way and it closes off one side of the piping. The bottom is always open because that is where you're going to attach this flexible hose that is already on your washing machine. Right now, if you don't currently have one of these systems, which I assume you don't because you're here with us tonight, that will just be probably stuck into your sewer standpipe. They're usually not affixed in any way. They're just kind of placed in, and you can just kind of yank them out. Other things to note here, we've got an anti-siphon valve, also sometimes just called like an air valve. They've got a few different names in different applications. We call it the anti-siphon. This is basically just a little piece to allow air to fall down the pipe and prevent backflow. This piece can be either inside or outside. Some people like to have it on the outside part just because it makes their indoor system that slight bit less conspicuous. You want to have that three-way valve be above the flood rim of the machine here. And just one last note is that people have come up with really clever ways to kind of disguise their gray water system. So you can see this is pretty common here. The sewer standpipe and the hot and cold water connections are in this little recessed area. We've seen people install a little recessed area to house their diverter valve, and they'll put like a little cabinet door over it so that it kind of blends in with their laundry room. Me personally, my washing machine is in my garage. No one's going out there for interior design tips. I don't mind having it on display. I actually prefer it that way because people ask about it and they want to learn about gray water. So from here, well, actually one more note on indoor before we transition to the outside. One of those code requirements is having really clear labeling. So we've got here the gray water manual. You know, when I hear the word manual, I picture like legalese, like a tome of words no one wants to read. The gray water manual is like one page. It's not a big deal at all. And then there are many ways to do it. You can use a picture, you can just write on the pipes. This person drew a little diagram. You just have to have it clearly marked which position of the valve goes to either the sewer or the landscape. For one, you know, we're forgetful. Sometimes we might even forget ourselves which way the water's going. But really, to me, this is more of a check or a fail-safe against if you have guests or someone's house sitting for you, or maybe you sell your home or you're a renter and your landlord approved for you to put this system in, but you move somewhere else. Anyone else who comes to use that washing machine is going to be able to really clearly see, okay, if I turn the valve this way, I'm sending water to the plants. If I turn it this way, I'm sending it to the sewer. And last, we've got a little sticker here noting that gray water is not for drinking, just like you might see on rainwater harvesting tanks. It's just a reminder for folks, like, it's not safe to drink, it's just for plants. Okay. This is always kind of an area with a lot of questions. So we have to get the gray water, unless you're in a situation where your washing machine is already on the exterior of a building. We have to get the water from the washing machine outside of the home. And we do that by drilling a small hole in the wall, or if you're going through a crawl space, it's going to be drilling a hole through the floor. So this is often the biggest deterrent or barrier for folks. And I get it. It can be intimidating or concerning to think about, what do you mean I'm just going to drill a hole through the outside wall? I don't want to like make sure I'm keeping all of these, water and other vectors outside of the home. Or what if I accidentally drill through something I'm not supposed to? I promise it's easier than you might think. And the tools are not that involved. You're going to need like a drill or driver with a hole saw bit, which you may already have, or you've probably seen. I should have a picture of it in here, but it's pretty easy to describe. It's basically a bit that you attach to a power driver or drill that has, it's round and it's got saw teeth on the outside part of it. So it spins really fast and you just push it right through the wall. If you're really, really concerned and you don't feel comfortable, like even using a stud finder or something for the peace of mind, you can always hire someone to put the hole in the wall for you. Just be sure that once you're finished assembling the system and everything's up and running, you're going to want to seal the small gap around your PVC pipe with like a construction grade sealant, something like Sikaflex, which is a silicone product, to really ensure that there's a good solid seal there. The hole is going to be just really the next size up from 1 inch, so that it's just big enough for the PVC to get through, so you're not having to like paste in a huge glob of silicone to seal it back up. So if you get to your exterior wall here and you've just got soil or planted area, the landscape that you're looking to irrigate with gray water, great. You can move on to assembling our transition here, which is going from this PVC to this flexible poly tube, or HDPE, which I'm pretty sure is high density polyethylene, basically irrigation tubing, united by this piece called a threaded union, which we love because you can take it apart if you ever needed to change anything, or for your once a year flushing of the system. If your situation is not that you have soil right at the exterior of your wall, maybe you've got a driveway you need to figure out your way around, or you've got a walking path, we're going to have to deal with that. We don't want to have PVC or poly tubing running on the top of the hardscape because it's a tripping hazard. You could disconnect the system, all kinds of bad things could happen. So in this example, the homeowner, whomever it was who put in the system, cut through their hardscape and put in the pipes underneath. That's one option. You could also bust up hardscape, and you can replace it with like plastic grating, pavers, or a lot of options. If on the outside of your wall, your situation is more that you've got like sort of a foundation planting area and then a walkway. So you've got soil on one side, hardscape, and then the landscape you're trying to irrigate. An easier, less invasive option is what you can see these folks in the bottom here doing, trenching underneath the hardscape and running the pipe like a chase underneath. One other option that can work sometimes is if you just need to get around a corner to get away from hardscape, is just sticking with the PVC for a while and hugging it close to the building. Just the only note I would have there is you want to have as few of these hard 90-degree elbow couplers as possible. I've never heard from anyone personally who's had an issue with their gray water system. or their laundry to landscape gray water system clogging with things like lint, but it certainly can happen. And if you've got those hard 90-degree turns, they're kind of a choke point for that sort of thing. So, if you're out in the landscape, curving that flexible tubing is always going to be a better option than using something so rigid. So once we've moved from PVC to the poly tubing, we are going to start routing that water to our plants. And I mentioned that a lot of the code has to do with how gray water enters the landscape. You notice, we've got this poly tubing. We don't just have like a regular garden hose here. You can't store laundry gray water. You can't run it with a pump. There's a very particular system and design for using laundry gray water to water plants, and it works beautifully. So let's talk about that really quick. At a glance, this is what a completed but not yet covered over outdoor portion of a L2L system looks like. So here's that same poly tubing we're talking about that started at the threaded union. If you look closely, you can see it's slightly below the soil surface in a bit of a trench. I know there's a lot of kind of shadows on this photo, so I hope you can see that. But essentially, wherever your pipe is running, you're going to dig a little trench for that poly tubing. Because when you're done, you're going to want to bury the poly tubing to protect it from UV radiation from the sun, and also to keep people, pets, animals from tripping over it. What we're trying to do is route that water through the poly tubing to these mulch basins, which I'll talk about in detail on the next slide. And we have sort of in these outdoor components of these systems, you're going to have kind of a main line of that 1 inch that comes straight from the PVC, and you're going to be branching off it to various mulch basins or infiltration sites, irrigation fields, lots of different names all mean the same thing. And you'll use these small PVC pieces to make those connections. I've got a list of parts on a slide coming up for y'all to look at, but rest assured we're going to send you a list of the names of everything you'll need to clear up any confusion. So the one thing I'll point out here, these little irrigation valve boxes that when we're doing gray water, we call them mulch shields. Something you can't see in this photo is inside of those, at the end of this 1/2 inch poly tubing, is another little plastic ball valve. We use ones that we call greenback ball valves because the like valve handle mechanism is green. These are going to allow you to control the flow of gray water at your various infiltration sites. And I'll talk about why that's important in just a little bit. I just wanted to point it out since it's not here in the diagram. So mulch basins, what are they? We've got a really nice little kind of cross-section diagram here, but it's pretty simple. They're basically just shallow, dug, and level trenches that are going to be this area that gray water enters the landscape to water your plants. These are going to be located right where you're planting. They can be all different shapes. Some people will do rings, some people do sort of horseshoes. It really just depends on your situation. So when you're installing the outdoor portion of a laundry to landscape system, you'll have already figured out what size these basins need to be, how many of them you need. We're going to teach you how to do that in just a few minutes. And it's, just you and hopefully friends and family to help with the shovels digging out these basins. Once they're dug and the gray water parts are installed, they get backfilled with mulch so that when the gray water enters the basin, it has to be 2 inches below the soil surface, as you can see in the diagram here. Even if you've got, you're doing the most amount of laundry you've ever done in a single day on your life, if that basin is filling up with water, the mulch is filtering any contaminants from it as it infiltrates, but it's also preventing there being quite the extent of like ponding standing water. So you can see in this one, as we're looking down into the mulch shield, as we call them, there's no mulch on the inside of them. The whole purpose of these mulch shields, which again are just like 6-inch round irrigation valve boxes, you can buy them at an irrigation store or hardware store, is to create kind of an air bubble around your poly tubing here. You know, plants are very smart. The roots want the water. They want to get as close up to the source of water as they can. If you had backfilled this with soil or even mulch, roots might grow back up into that tubing, which could block it and cause all kinds of problems that you don't want. If anyone here has ever had to call Roto-Rooter and have them blast through roots in your pipes, you know how much of a headache that can be. But roots won't grow through that gap of air. They'll stop short where the soil or the mulch ends. So that's why we have these mulch shields. So here's a look at a mulch basin that was dug for a tree that has already been growing for a while. It's established. You can see they chose this circular shape. I personally like the circular shape. You know, plants are pretty good at distributing water. Even if you're only watering on one side, the roots will send it all over, but it just makes more sense to my brain to be watering all around the plant. Circumstances you might not choose the full circle usually have to do with setbacks that we'll talk about, like property lines and wells and like the foundation of your home and things like that. If you are using gray water to irrigate existing plants, you are going, oops, sorry. You're going to want to be digging that mulch basin at the drip line of plants. So basically as wide as the branches of your tree go, because when rain falls, that's where water is naturally going to drip down. That's where roots have evolved to uptake water. With existing plants, you're also going to want to be really careful when you're digging not to disturb the roots that are growing there. It's not a deal breaker or anything, but that's just, you know, one more reason why newer plantings are often a better choice than you know, trees that are already used to their growing conditions. It's pretty similar for when you're planting new plants. As you can see here, they've got the half circle because we want to be 1.5 feet away from a property line with this fence here. The main difference is, you know, if we only dug the mulch basin at the drip line of this very small plant, we'd be digging right into the root ball of the plant. So we're going just slightly wider than the drip zone. And as the plant grows, you can dig your basins out wider to match it so that you're watering in the proper place. But you can see where the roots are in relation to the mulch basin here. We've got like our soil surface. They've kind of bermed up above. You want your roots to be the root crown, so basically where the roots meet the stem of your plant, to be like just slightly higher than the soil surface, because with all this disturbance and all the water that's going to come in, it's going to settle just a little bit. So you want the roots to be in the soil, but not way down at the bottom of the basin, so that when you backfill it with mulch, you have mulch piling up around the stem of your plant, because that's a good way to introduce disease to your plants. We don't want that. Just a quick look at those setbacks. I won't go into the detail. You can take a look, and again, we'll send you all this information in the follow-up. Got a good example here from Brad Lancaster, who's sort of a water conservation reuse wizard from Tucson. You can see his mulch basins are pretty far from his house. That's really what we're going for. We don't want to cause any problems with our foundation or with creeks or wells or anything like that. Got just a couple quick considerations before we go into how you actually figure out how to design these systems. Once you're finished, you want to paint your PVC pipes. Why? Well, one, it might look better, but more importantly, the paint is going to protect your pipes from UV degradation. They'll last longer. To do that, you're going to want to use a product like a latex-based paint, and they actually make PVC-specific primers that are really good for that. You know, maybe you've got a red house, you can paint your pipes red so they're not the white PVC. They'll look a little better, a little less conspicuous. So just like we want to bury our poly tubes to protect them, we want to paint our PVC to protect it. I promised you a parts list. It looks like a lot on paper. There's a lot of terminology that if you've never done anything with PVC is going to seem kind of strange. If you've ever accidentally wandered down the PVC aisle of a hardware store or an irrigation store, you might be panicking right now. Don't worry. If you take the list of parts we send you into maybe a hardware store, but definitely an irrigation store, something like Wyatt Irrigation, which is right in Santa Rosa. The staff there are super knowledgeable. They'll be happy to help you find all the parts that you need. All you'll have to do is figure out the number of parts you need. A lot of them are going to be the same no matter what. All systems are going to have, one air vent. Pretty much all of them are going to have, or they'll all have one 3-way diverter valve. Some of the other parts, there's a little variation, but it'll be very easy to figure out, and we can help you if you run into any problems. Similarly, tools and materials, you're going to need a shovel to dig those basins. You're going to want measuring tape to cut your PVC to the right length. You need that driller driver with the hole saw bit. PVC cutters are great. They're sort of like a little vice clamp that'll cut right through the PVC. You could use a hacksaw, but you're going to end up shaving microplastic all over the place. It's a mess. It pollutes. We avoid it if we can. It's an inexpensive tool, or you can get one from the Santa Rosa tool library. You'll need Teflon tape to wrap the pipe thread fittings, PVC glue and primer. Gorilla Glue makes a like eco-friendly glue and primer combo that I like. And then you'll need some kind of clippers or hand pruners to cut the poly tubing to the right lengths when you're working on the outside components. I saw we had a bunch of questions about Greywater friendly soaps. This is always a big question for folks. In that handout we're going to send you, we have a really comprehensive list of chemical compounds that you want to avoid to keep your plants as healthy as possible and make sure we're not putting things that could be harmful into our watershed. But the easiest rule of thumb is you want to avoid as much sodium as you can. Very small amounts is okay, but if you can avoid it altogether, that's definitely a best practice. Boron, borax, and then chlorine are things that you don't want in your Greywater system. We've got a few recommended soaps here. So there's Oasis, which I mentioned earlier. Art Ludwig, who created these systems, developed this soap specifically for Greywater. There's a few others here. I've heard Trader Joe's has a liquid detergent that's Greywater compatible, but you really want to read the labels. There are some brands that have marketing that sounds like it's going to be good for Greywater, but they actually have a bunch of sodium in them. So you always want to check the labels. There are some products that I don't personally have experience with, like soap nuts and Wonder Balls that are Greywater friendly. And personally, I don't know anything about ozone laundry systems other than somehow they use ozone, the oxygen compound, to clean things. If you have one, good news, you can have a laundry to landscape system. That's as much as I know. Okay, so this has been a lot of information, and we're going to look at some very, very simple equations. Don't worry, it's not complicated math at all, to figure out how to design, your Greywater system to handle the amount of Greywater that you are creating in your washing machine. This is super important to ensure that you're, one, not going to be flooding your lawn and your neighbor, or your yard rather, and your neighbor's property and your storm drains with Greywater, but also to make sure that you're getting your plants the amount of water they need, not too little and not too much. So the first one's very straightforward. It's figuring out how many gallons of Greywater per week you're creating. So that first thing you're going to need to do is figure out how many gallons per load your washing machine is. Some washing machines will have that information printed like on a sticker, maybe under the lid, or inside the lid if it's a front loader. Sometimes you can find that information from the manufacturer on their website. I wish it was standard, but it hasn't been my experience. One kind of foolproof way is to get a bunch of containers and take that flexible tube that we're going to eventually put in the 3-way valve, run a full cycle and fill up your containers. You know, if it's 5-gallon buckets or whatever, to figure out how much water you're creating. Some general figures are the older top loading machines are about 40 gallons a load, sometimes 45. It's actually great for gray water. You can water a ton of plants if you've got a machine that uses a lot of water. So, well, on one hand, they're considered not ideal because they use a lot of water. If you've got a gray water system, that's great. High efficiency front loaders, about 15. Top efficient loaders, about 25. Again, these are rough. If you can figure out the exact amount your washing machine uses, that's better. The next thing you're going to need to know is the daily maximum. So I want you to think about, like, what is the outlier scenario? The most laundry you're ever going to do in a day. You've got company, your kids had a soccer tournament in the rain and they're covered in mud. You did sheets, you did towels. You know, it's like, okay, I'll never do more than 5 full loads of laundry in a day. That's what I mean by daily maximum. So you'll take that gallons per load figure and then you'll multiply it by the loads per day. So say you have a machine that does 20 gallons a load and you're never going to do more than 5 loads a day, 100 gallons. Pretty straightforward. The reason these numbers are important is the gallons per week tells us how many plants we can water. And the daily maximum will tell us how much capacity we need to dig out with our mulch basins to make sure we're not overflowing. So it's actually not too tricky sizing these basins. Liz and I have had experiences of trying to use some pretty complicated equations to size these things. And it turns out we were just kind of overcomplicating things, which is great news because it's easier than we thought. So basically, these basins just need to be big enough to handle the maximum daily load amount of gray water. So a rough figure there is 1 square foot per gallon of gray water. This is going to vary depending on what soil type you have. If you've got really clay heavy soil, your basins are going to have to be bigger. If you've got really sandy soil, you could technically make them smaller. I don't recommend it. It's better to have them be too big than too small. It's very forgiving. If you dig your mulch basins and it turns out they aren't big enough, you need to make them bigger, grab your shovel, dig them out a little bigger, problem solved. If you dig them too big, you may have done a little extra work, but it's not going to cause any real problems. So if you're doing 20 gallons as your daily maximum, not a lot of laundry, but just for example's sake, the bottom of your basin should be 20 square feet. So we're not doing cubic feet. We're digging about a foot down, but we're not thinking about all that space with mulch. We're just thinking about that level surface of the basin. And I should have mentioned this sooner, but the reason it's important for those basins to be level is so that water is spreading out throughout them and infiltrating evenly across the root zone rather than just all, infiltrating in one spot. Or, because if it's on a slope, it will be resistant to going up. It'll pool more. Okay, so, we do have an equation. If you want to be really precise, more power to you. We've got that in our handout that we're emailing to you. So keep an eye out for that. So if you know this number that you come up with is for your total square footage, which means the number of basins you choose to have in your landscape is going to, the square footage of each of those will total this number. So it's partially up to you how many basins you have to total up, let's say, that 20 square feet. It's partially up to you, but it's also limited by the gallons per load. And so if you've got a top loader, you're going to want to do no more than 15 different outlets. That's a lot. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of plants. But you can go up to 15 outlets or mulch basins with the mulch shield. That's what I mean by outlets, just where that poly tube is letting gray water out into the mulch basin. Front loaders, no more than 6 to 8. And those new Energy Star ultra efficient front loaders, we're only going to do up to 4 basins. And again, these are maximums. If you wanted, technically you could have one basin that's 20 square feet. As long as that one basin is big enough to handle your daily maximum, that's okay. You just don't want to go either over these maximum numbers or have less square footage than can handle the amount of gray water you've got. Hopefully that was clear. We're new to doing it this simpler way. I'm excited about it, but we've, haven't explained it too many times. So next, we're going to figure out how many plants we can have. And this is going to vary based on what kind of plants you're planting. Luckily, there are some really incredible internet tools we can use to figure out what our plants' water needs are, and also some tools that'll tell us how much water specifically they need different times of year based on where you live, which is really fantastic. So the first tool I want to uplift is called WUCalls from UC Davis. I believe it's the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. It's a really user-friendly interface. If you just Google these, WUCalls like this, it'll come up and it'll take you to their website. You go to the plant search database. You'll type in the name of the city you live in, and you can type in either a specific plant that you're trying to find information for, or you can do like a reverse search and say, oh, I'm looking for moderate use plants, and it'll give you a list. And it'll tell you whether it's high, medium, low, and very low. So similarly, we've got really intricate equations for figuring out how much water your plants need, which is where this evapotranspiration number comes into effect. We're not going to talk about that tonight. If you really want to learn about it and the resources we send you aren't clear, send us an email. We'll walk you through it, but we're trying to keep it as low barrier as possible. So once you know whether it's high, moderate, low, or very low, you can navigate over to a wonderful website called Puddle Stompers that has a bunch of different useful apps on it. It actually, I think, has a direct link to the WUCalls database that will tell you, based on your city and what time, what kind of plant and whether it's in shade, part sun, or full sun, and the size of your plant. It'll tell you how much water you need. And so the reason why the time frame is important is because, different times of year, the heat and intensity of the sun evaporates more water from the landscape. So July is what we call peak irrigation. That's when the most water is evaporating off the landscape. So we want to design our systems to handle the amount of water and to water our plants at that point, that peak irrigation. You don't have to be meeting that number year round, but you want to make sure that in those really hot July days and those August days that you can get your plants enough water from your washing machine. So a really rough figure so you can see in this example here, I punched in all this information. We've got a tree that's 8 feet wide. It tells us we need 22 gallons of water per week in July. Kind of another rough way of figuring that out is that 8 foot wide tree. If you figure out the area, I won't go through the equation, but it's 50 feet in area. If you cut the area in half, that's roughly how much water it needs. That's 25 gallons a week, pretty close to 22. Again, it's kind of a, blunt tool for surgery, but it gets you in the ballpark. If you're using a low water use plant rather than moderate, cut it in half again. So 12 and a half gallons a week. Again, we'll send you the link. It's puddle-stompers.com. It was created by Lori Palmquist. Really excellent free resource. An even rougher way to figure out your plant needs, if even this feels like, oh, I don't know if I want to figure all this out and deal with the numbers, is that small to medium sized trees need about 20 to 40 gallons a week. A small medium shrub, 10 to 20 gallons a week. A drought tolerant shrub, 2 to 6 gallons a week. So if that, just giving you general sense, it's also good ballparks to check your own numbers against. And if you're doing it this way and it feels like your plants aren't getting enough water, you can always supplement with hand watering. Obviously, we want to try to minimize hand watering. That's the whole point of the gray water system, but it happens. So the last thing before we can jump into questions here is maintenance. One of the things I love about laundry to landscape gray water systems is they're very low maintenance. Once a year, you should definitely check the system for leaks. Can be kind of hard in places you've buried the poly tube. You can either unearth it, so maybe you've just covered it with mulch, that's ideal. But check for leaks and flush the system, which is where you unscrew that threaded union piece that we showed you, and you'll see it again on the next slide. Stick a hose on it and just run hose water through it. And that'll push any lint or anything that's in there through. And then last, mulch composts. It breaks down. You're going to want to replenish the mulch in your mulch basins as needed. I definitely recommend doing that flush once a year, but we know, Liz and I have talked to a lot of people who have had gray water systems for about a decade, and they're like, I have to admit, I've never flushed it, but I've never had any clogs either. So it's best practice, but just kind of goes to show and underscore the little amount of maintenance that is needed, which just makes them that much more excellent of a strategy. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to pass it back to Liz for 1 second before we go into questions. And I'm going to lower the shades and get the sun off my face while Liz talks to y'all.
Awesome. Thank you, Connor. While we are here, I just wanted to mention for folks who are joining this evening's program, if you are a Santa Rosa Water customer, you are automatically entered into a raffle to win a free Greywater laundry to landscape parts kits. We will contact a winner by August 12th, so stay tuned for that. And now I think it's time for us to pivot to questions. There's a few of them in the Q&A, and I'm sure as we begin talking, more will come. So Connor, if you don't mind, I'm ready to read them off, and let's dive into it.
Yeah, and obviously, anyone that you feel called to answer, go for it.
You bet. Yeah, so this first one, I'm just going to kind of go down the line. Tom is asking about free supplies and rebates in Petaluma. As far as I know, right now, we do not have free supplies or rebates specific to Greywater. Stay tuned. Hopefully in the near future, that will be available. But in this moment, none for Greywater, unfortunately. We had a couple of questions in the chat and in the Q&A when you were going over plants that are good candidates for Greywater. Mm-hmm. And could you maybe repeat how you can use Greywater for food, specifically for fruits and vegetables? Some folks were feeling a little bit confused, thinking that you cannot use Greywater for fruits and vegetables.
Gotcha. Yeah, great question. Super important. One of the things I love about Greywater is that not across the board, but it is good for food production. So the reason I say fruit trees are so great is because in general, if you're growing a fruit tree, the food is well above the ground. So the concern with using Greywater to water things you're going to eat is the Greywater can't come in contact with anything directly that you're going to eat. So it can touch like the trunk of a fruit tree, but if you were growing a lemon tree and the lemons were growing on the ground and touching the Greywater, they would be considered no longer safe to eat. So when it comes to vegetables, for example, things like root vegetables, onions, carrots, beets, anything that is growing under the ground is going to come in contact with Greywater. So that's not a good use and considered against the code. There's some gray area with other vegetables, like something like squash, where you've got a zucchini plant. Sometimes they're huge and they're growing on the ground. Sometimes they're supported. If you're growing things on a trellis, you can kind of have a workaround there. But again, the key is you can't have the Greywater come in direct contact with the part of any food crop that you're going to eat. Hopefully that clears it up.
Nice, that felt thorough. Thank you. What about any sort of lint or pet hair or human hair or anything that usually comes out of the washing machine? How does that affect a gray water system?
Yeah, so those sorts of things, they'll take a long time to break down out in your soil. Like, I always thought that, like, and I learned a while ago that, like, fingernails and hair, things like keratin, they actually take quite a long time to decompose, but they're not going to be harmful to your plants or to soil life. Our hairs fall off our heads all the time. Our pet hairs, they're already out in the landscape, totally fine. There is a small possibility. Again, I've never heard of it happening from anyone personally, but it certainly isn't within the realm of possibility that if you are, I don't know, you're washing like your dog bed cover and it's got 10 years of dog hair buildup, like theoretically the lint could clog the system. But if that happened, depending on where it is, you might be able to like pull the clog out or, disconnect the system and get your hose on like jet mode and just blast it through. Generally, I don't know of any instances of it causing any real problems.
Nice. And also, the mulch does serve as a bit of a filter as well.
Right. You might find a lot of that stuff underneath your mulch shield, where it's like meeting the mulch down at the bottom. But again, it's not really going to cause any problems.
Yeah, common question. How far below the surface would you suggest PVC is set if you are moving water away from the house?
Yeah, so typically the PVC itself is going to be above the surface because you're going to want that threaded union to be accessible. If you use like Schedule 80 PVC, it will hold up okay buried. It shouldn't matter, but you want that union to be accessible just in case you have a blockage or for any reason you need to do some system maintenance. Typically, you're going to be burying the poly tubing instead of the PVC. And there's not really any set depth. I would keep it pretty close to the soil surface myself because you don't want the lower you bury the tubing, the lower the outflow has to be, right? If you bury that tubing a foot down, unless you're working on a really steep slope, your mulch basins, the water's going to come out a foot down, which isn't necessarily a problem. But again, we want to try to keep things accessible just in case we run into any problems, or if you want to like play with those ball valves and say like, oh, I'm running the system and too much water's coming out in my first basin and not enough's going to the end. So I'm going to like kind of close that valve. Or maybe, oh, my apple tree is getting more, it doesn't need any water right now, but the plants at the end do. So I'm going to shut this one entirely. If you bury that tubing too low, those mulch shields are going to be pretty far down. It'll just make things more difficult. So one thing I failed to mention in the presentation that's an important consideration is, your washing machine has a pump, so there's a little pressure behind the water, but we really want to be working with gravity whenever we can. So first of all, you want the first outlet in your system to be the highest in elevation on your system. Because if you've got like low points in your landscape and you've got a mulch basin here, a mulch basin here, and then 2 feet up in slope, you've got one, it's going to be really hard for water to want to go up to that top one. All the water is going to come out at those lower elevations. So, it is possible to like go down and then back up to that first one. But as a best practice, just try to work with gravity. You're working from top to
bottom. Nice. Great explanation, Connor. And when we're talking about mulch basins, have you experienced any issues with mulch basins and gophers? I know those are very prominent in Sonoma County.
I haven't personally. I know that's something we talk about a lot, and I think maybe Liz, I can't remember who we were talking to. Somebody had a little bit of backfill from gophers, but it's a problem. You can always, if you wanted to, you could cage it off with gopher wire, or you could just, excavate it and see what happens if the gopher comes back. I haven't heard of the gophers like chewing through the poly and causing any major problems like that? Have you?
No, I have not. I think gopher wire on the bottom of your mulch shield is probably a very solid solution. Your ball valve where the water is coming out is not going to be at the bottom of your mulch shield. So ideally there is an air gap that can allow a little bit of dirt or soil to be to come up from gopher activity, but not enter your system.
Right. Yeah. So on the mulch shield, you'll use that hole saw again to drill a hole in them. You know, they have little openings at the bottom, but we don't want to have to like put the poly tube on a sharp angle because it might kink and clog. So you like drill the hole in, it'll come up, and like Liz said, big air gap. So, you know, if in a lot of situations, the gopher would have to like jump to reach it.
They're pretty crazy. You never know.
It's true. I'd be surprised, but I wouldn't be in disbelief. Yeah.
Good questions.
Yeah.
How about vinegar? Is vinegar okay for your system and for your plants?
Yes, vinegar works. You know, if you're using a lot of vinegar, you're going to want to keep an eye on like the pH of your soil around your outflows because it's very acidic. But typically, you know, if you're using vinegar in your laundry, from what I hear, people are usually only using like a tablespoon or so in a load, and to help like with odors from athletic clothes and stuff. That's going to be so diluted, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But if you notice your plants are looking sad, you might, you know, check the pH of the soil. You can always figure out like soil additives or amendments to kind of balance that pH change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And somebody in the chat, I think they're asking again for clarification around soaps, but I think you're touching on it here that a lot of the ingredients in many different soaps contain chemicals that will kill the soil or can harm your plants. So it is really important to avoid some of those key things that Connor mentioned earlier. And then also to interact with your landscape, make sure that that plants are receiving enough water, or if you are using vinegar, for example, or a soap alternative that you just want to try, be sure that you're looking at your space and researching if a plant is changing its condition, why does it now have yellow leaves, or why is it now drooping, for example.
Sure.
Do you want to touch on the maintenance that is needed on the tubing to ensure that the water makes it to each plant?
Yeah. So typically I don't really, I mean, it's always good to be doing periodic check-ins, and you can always, the beauty of these mulch shields or valve boxes is they have lids you can take off. And typically we're going to have those be at the soil surface so that you'd always like put a rock over it or something, or just a really thin layer of mulch. Also, I'll just kill two birds with one stone here. I saw another question. You could totally use, you don't have to use arbor mulch. You could use sand or lava rock, something like that. If you wanted to, gravel is fine. So it's good to check in on those things periodically and make sure, you know, run your washing machine and run out and go look, see what happens. But typically this is something you're going to do in the beginning when you're doing your first test flows of your washing machine. So you've got everything connected, you run a load, maybe you are washing clothes, maybe you're just doing a rinse cycle to make sure everything's working. And you go out and you just observe. You say like, oh, wow, this valve is like a fire hose and this one is like dribbling out. You would just take those ball valves and kind of slightly close the one that's doing a lot of water and make sure the one that's dribbling is all the way open. It'll take a little bit of tweaking. The more level you can have your tubing, the less tinkering you're going to have to do. So it's good to keep that in mind as you're digging the trench for your poly. You want to try to be consistent in the depth that you're going with.
Mm-hmm. Nice, thank you. Somebody in the chat asked if we're going to be doing a webinar on shower to flower systems. So we'll just take a moment to uplift that we have done a series of 3 programs actually with Laura Allen. She is a co-founder of Greywater Action, incredibly knowledgeable individual, has influenced a lot of different policies and rebates in cities revolving around Greywater. So we will not be doing a shower to flower program through Santa Rosa. At this time, we will not be, but take a look at our website. We do have a recording, and you could probably find it very helpful.
Mhm.
I'm going to scroll down and then work my way back up. Christina is
Sure.
asking about soil type and how that plays a role in a graywater system. Sounds like they live in Roseland, where there is adobe and the soil expands and cracks.
Yeah. So the soil type is not going to determine whether or not it'll work. It'll just change the way that you are designing your mulch basins. So with your adobe, I haven't really thought before too much about if there are big cracks in it, which will obviously change the way water flows. But my instinct would be to just kind of design it in such a way that you're assuming that those cracks will fill up with regular watering. The clay, it's really malleable. It'll kind of fill. It cracks when it dries out, right? So if you're doing regular laundry throughout the dry season, and again, I see another question. When it's wet and rainy, you won't be sending gray water necessarily. You might send it to the sewer instead of the landscape, just turning that valve. It depends on what your plants are. You might still use gray water even when it's really rainy, unless the soil's like super saturated. But basically, you just want your mulch basins to be bigger. Then you like figure out your calculation. You're like, oh, they should be 20 square feet. If you've got like super intense adobe, you might do 25 square feet or even 30. Like I said before, it's better to go too big than too small. And over time, as that mulch breaks down, it'll be compost. It's going to slightly change the soil absorption in those sites. It's always going to be clay, but the more organic matter that you have in those basins, the more water it'll hold on to, rather than just like ponding or going down through cracks. And similarly, you could try putting a thin layer of compost at the bottom of your mulch basins as kind of a buff against any of those problems.
Nice. And then also when planting into adobe, I would highly recommend any sort of compost or amending your soil. That will also help with your plants being able to absorb the water from the gray water.
Right. We've done a couple gray water systems in adobe, both in Petaluma and Cotati, as like volunteer community workshops. And the other note is that it budget plenty of time for digging, as if it's in your garden, you're probably well aware, but it's digging those mulch basins is a little harder in the adobe.
So true. You got this though. We've had a couple of folks asking about support and having somebody come out to their site or helping somebody do the design and installation. We can certainly send our contractor referral list, but I would highly recommend quell.net for folks who are interested. I just dropped it in the chat. For folks who might be interested in hiring a company. Connor, I think you have some familiarity with some folks around here locally, maybe Water Wizards.
Yeah. So really amazing guy, Ethan Hirsch Tauber, runs a company called Worldwide Water Wizards, and he also works for an educational kind of permaculture oriented group around alternative water education and like restoring the water cycle. So super knowledgeable, very friendly. You can hire him to install a system for you, or I can't say for certain that he'd be willing to just come out for a consultation, but we'll share his contact in the follow-up email. You can always reach out to him. He's exceptionally affordable, I think, because he believes so much in the importance of these systems. He wants to keep it accessible for folks. So highly recommend reaching out to Worldwide Water Wizards.
Nice, thank you. And as Connor has mentioned, we will be sending along a number of different resources. A laundry system is meant to be do it yourself, but I completely understand if folks are intimidated by that or don't feel like they have the skills. But all the resources that we do share could also be shared with your neighbors or a contractor or somebody that you think can help you with the installation of a system. And you can always reach out to us if you have more specific questions.
Yeah, I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat, so I might just try to like rapid fire through a couple of those. Given the non-recyclable aspect of PVC, is there an alternative indoor plumbing plastic that can be in its place and recycled at the end of its life? That's an excellent question that I do not know the answer to. The PVC has a decent life. But if there's a better option, I will definitely want to know about it. So Jason, if you find an answer to that, please let us know. Maybe we'll look into it ourselves. And if we find an answer, we'll share it with everyone who came tonight in that follow-up email. Liz, we've got a couple questions about pumps. You want to address that?
Sure.
Various questions, but I think it'll be the same answer for all of them.
Yeah, I think it will be too. So according to code for gray water in particular, you have to rely on the pump in your washing machine. So technically you cannot store the water outside of your washing machine. You cannot pump the water outside of your washing machine. So that's kind of the short answer to pumping water, unfortunately.
Right. I believe it's different with branch drain or shower to flower systems, which there are a couple questions around that in the chat as well. So the short answer is yes, you do need a three-way valve for bathroom sinks, showers, and tubs, but it's a bigger one. It has to be put into your sewer line. So this is something that you need to either have the skill set to do yourself or hire a plumber or contractor to do. But either way, you're going to have to get a permit. So shower to flowers, the reason we didn't really talk about it tonight is because it's its whole own category. If you're going through that whole process of permitting and designing and engineering a shower to flower system, to answer your other question, Paul, you can't, or partially answer it. I don't know about what the best method as regards to going down through the floor, because I can't really speak to the shower to flowers so much, but you can, I believe, tie your laundry water in with that same branch drain system. There aren't any particular advantages to that other than you would be getting X amount more gallons in that system and you'd have fewer outlets to have to figure out. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking out our recording as well as the Greywater Action website and the Oasis Design website for more info on shower to flower. You can email us questions and we can do our best, but Greywater Action is a better resource when it comes to permitted systems.
Absolutely. And either the website or I definitely know our recording for shower to flower systems talks about the type of storage tanks and pumps for a shower system.
Yeah. Stephanie's question, you can, I don't have a lot of experience with the microplastic filters other than like the little ball you can just throw in with it. But as long as it is, and I'm sure yeah, the answer would be yes, because it's in the machine before the water reaches the sewer standpipe. So water will flow through it the same way it does without and go into your Greywater system. And in fact, you know, the next time I do this presentation, I'll include a slide about it because it's so important to, if we're washing, you know, mixed fibers that have plastic in them, to try to interrupt the flow of microplastics into our waterways as much as we can. So whether it's those more sophisticated filters or that get a good percentage of the microplastics or the little, you know, washer balls that get like 40%, both are compatible with Greywater.
And then we have two questions that maybe we can just kind of summarize in one. So Carrie was asking about how the system is managed from start to finish, and Deborah was asking about how you know there is a blockage. As far as the blockage question goes, like I mentioned earlier, I would really encourage you all to continue to monitor your system. If there was a blockage, obviously there wouldn't be water coming through the outlet, but because you are installing that anti-siphon valve, no water will be coming back into your home or into your system. I have not encountered anybody who ever has had a blockage, but maybe through gopher activity or you haven't cleaned out your mulch basins, there's a chance of it. I would say as often as you can, open up the lid to your mulch basin, make sure water is flowing out. And if it's not, you have that clean out valve with the threaded union that you can put a hose to and flush your system if need be. And then as far as how the system is managed, once it's installed, for the most part, it takes care of itself. You know, maybe there's an annual clean out. There's the annual clean out and there's the three-way brass valve. I think the brass valve is going to be the biggest thing that you need to manage, which comes into managing your own behavioral, how you're working with your system. Are you using a detergent that has chemicals that shouldn't go out into your landscape, or are you using all eco-friendly organic products? But maybe you do need to do that bleach load, so you move it back to the sewer or the septic. And outside, you have the threaded union to be able to flush the system if need be. Other than that, I would say that this system is can be pretty hands-off.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and be sure to communicate with anybody that you live with, any guests, rentals, whatever, about the products that are needed. Like Connor mentioned, having a diagram and clear labeling is essential to the functionality and the success of this system and in turn your landscape.
Yeah, I just saw a question come in from Diane. What is the maximum sodium level that's okay for gray water systems? And you use drops. So we actually had people ask about drops before, and in one of our Laura Allen presentations, and I don't remember her answer. It's not one that I'm familiar with, but the short answer is none of these products are going to tell you exactly how much sodium is in them. It's kind of like the way ingredients are listed is in order of concentration and amount. So water is usually going to be the first one because a lot of these commercial detergents are more water than anything else. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you an exact percentage or anything, and the products aren't going to tell you what percentage they are either. My best advice would be to we could try to follow up with Laura Allen, but you might even reach out to Drops if you're really a big fan of their product and it's working well for you. They might, if they've got good customer service, they might tell you how much sodium's going on in there. Awesome. Yeah, thanks. And I'll look into it too.
Yeah, really good questions. Oh, look at that. Yeah, their ingredient list looks pretty helpful. It does seem like there's a fair amount of sodium. I like Connor's suggestion, reaching out to them and pairing that with monitoring your landscape and how your plants are reacting to the ingredients that they're receiving, I think will be a good, it might be a telltale sign that there's too much sodium in a product. I love it. Well, we're almost at time, or we are at time officially now. I think this has been a great presentation. I hope you all have learned something new. Connor, excellent job. And I look forward to following up with resources. We're here for you if you have any questions after this too.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. And thanks again to the city of Santa Rosa for making it possible.
Absolutely.
Get out there and save some water.
Woohoo!
Have fun and grow some food.
Yeah, please grow food. Awesome, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening. We'll be in touch. Until next time. Bye, Connor.